What if I told you that in the Middle Ages, a butcher's son could end up richer than kings? That a monk could own more land than an army of knights? Or that lending money to the wrong person could literally cost you your head? Let's travel back in time, to an age of swords, prayers, and pure gold. Imagine being born in a world where your destiny was already decided the moment you took your first breath. You were either born into silk sheets and endless banquets, or into mud, toil, and hunger. The saying, "the rich get richer and the poor get poorer," didn't just describe the Middle Ages, it defined them. Yet, even in that rigid world, there were cracks in the system. Tiny openings through which ambition, cunning, or divine favor could slip and turn a nobody into a legend. Let's uncover the secret paths to fortune. From the warlords who bathed in gold, to the monks who brewed their own empires, to the merchants who mastered the art of wealth itself. Crossed swords, those who fight. Medieval society was built on three pillars: those who fight, those who pray, and those who work. And at the top of the fighter's pyramid stood the king, the ultimate landlord, ruler of land, men, and taxes. Every field, every harvest, every ton of silver mined, all ultimately belonged to him. His royal estates funded the palace, the armies, and the endless wars that drained his subjects' pockets. Yet, when a king won, he didn't just gain glory, he gained gold. Take Emperor Basil II of Byzantium, for instance. He ruled for nearly half a century, from 976 to 1025, and amassed a treasury so vast it kept his empire financially stable for decades after his death. He wasn't extravagant. No jeweled thrones or golden goblets for him. His gold went into walls, soldiers, and power. By the time he died, Basil had done the impossible. He'd made his empire rich and secure. But in the Middle Ages, wealth wasn't just about money. It was about influence, loyalty, land, control. If you could command an army or own trade routes, you were richer than any coin could make you. Below the king came the aristocracy, the dukes, the earls, and the barons. These were the tenants-in-chief, men who owned their estates by the king's grace and could lose them at his whim. They owed him loyalty and war. Specifically, 40 days of fighting each year. Anything beyond that, they'd demand payment. An earl in the 14th century could earn between £700 and £3,000 a year from his lands. And then there was Thomas of Lancaster, who held 4 earldoms at once: Leicester, Derby, Lincoln, and Salisbury, pulling in what would today be the equivalent of £6.5 million every single year. The closer you stood to the crown, the richer you became. Queen Isabella, wife of Edward II, granted herself an income equal to £10 million in modern money. And the king's favorite, Hugh Despencer the Younger, was rewarded with castles, entire fortresses like Wallingford, Hanley, and Bristol, until his greed sparked a war between king and barons. When the smoke cleared, Edward and Despencer walked away with confiscated titles and lands worth over £46 million in today's money. Military medal knights, the working-class warriors of wealth. A rank below the lords stood the knights, about 3,000 of them across England. Their average income hovered around £40 per year, which might not sound impressive, until you realize a skilled laborer made less than 3 shillings a week. But knights had a lucrative side hustle: ransom. If you captured an enemy during battle, he was your walking paycheck. When King John II of France was captured at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, his ransom was so enormous, 3 million écus, or roughly £660,000, that it funded England's treasury for years. Even a regular French soldier could fetch 60 crowns, about £13. For a lucky knight who captured several enemies, a single battle could change his life forever. Musical note: soft medieval music fades in. If swinging a sword wasn't your style, there was another, quieter path to wealth, one that required no armor, just faith. Latin cross, those who pray. The church was the medieval world's second empire, and its riches rivaled that of kings. By the 14th century, England alone had over 1,000 religious houses, abbeys, nunneries, monasteries, and hospitals. The great abbeys of Glastonbury and Westminster had annual incomes of more than £2,000, enormous sums for the time. Monasteries weren't just holy sanctuaries, they were businesses. They owned farmland, mills, bakeries, breweries, even their own granaries. They traded, lent money, and collected tithes from the faithful. You could start as a simple monk, even a peasant, and rise through the ranks. Ambition, education, and a touch of divine luck could carry you far. Just look at Thomas Wolsey, the son of a butcher, who became Archbishop of York, a cardinal, and eventually Lord Chancellor to King Henry VIII. His personal wealth allowed him to spend what would be £25 million modern pounds renovating Hampton Court Palace. Not bad for a man whose father sold meat at the market. If fighting and praying weren't your calling, there was still one more path left. One that built the foundation of the modern world. The path of those who work. At first glance, that title doesn't sound promising. In the Middle Ages, workers meant peasants, the men and women who tilled the land, harvested crops, and lived their entire lives tied to a patch of soil they didn't even own. Social mobility was nearly impossible. If your father was a farmer, so were you. End of story. But every rule has its exceptions, and the ones who dared to move, to learn, to trade, they discovered the cracks in the feudal wall where fortune could seep through. Sheaf of rice, the rise of the workers. For most peasants, life meant survival. You worked the Lord's land, paid taxes, and prayed you wouldn't starve before winter. But some realized that opportunity lived elsewhere. In towns and cities where hands were needed and gold changed pockets daily. If you had a skill, if you could weave, forge, carve, or build, you could escape the mud. A skilled craftsman could sell his products for coin, rent a small shop, and eventually buy his own plot of land. Hard work, a bit of luck, and the right connections could transform a peasant into a respectable tradesman, even a landowner. Becoming a servant in a wealthy household could also be surprisingly profitable. If you served the right lord, you could earn food, shelter, and enough money to build a small fortune. But the real wealth, the kind that changed history, was born not in castles or cathedrals, but in cities. Cityscape, the merchant class, Europe's new power. In the 12th and 13th centuries, cities across Europe exploded with life. Bruges, Paris, Hamburg, Venice, and Genoa became trading giants, bustling with goods, ships, and ambition. Trade was the great equalizer. You didn't need noble blood to sell silk or spice. Just courage and clever timing. Ships arrived from Africa, Portugal, and the Mediterranean loaded with luxury textiles, perfumes, jewels, and spices. Each time goods changed hands, their price rose, and so did the merchant's fortune. For the first time in history, money could move faster than armies. The towns gained autonomy, forming guilds and local governments. Peasants became traders. Traders became merchants, and merchants became bankers. Bank from trade to banking. The birth of medieval millionaires. Meet the Medici family, the billionaires of the 15th century. They began humbly in the wool trade of Florence, but soon realized that money itself was the most valuable product of all. In 1397, they founded the Medici Bank, which spread across Europe with branches in London, Rome, Geneva, and Avignon. Their fortune shaped politics, funded popes, and helped birth the Renaissance. And they weren't alone. Francesco d'Attini, born in 1335, became a legend of self-made success. He started as an apprentice in Florence, traveled to Avignon, then the seat of the papacy, and began trading in weapons during the 100 Years' War. Profitable? Absolutely. But d'Attini didn't stop there. He sold art, jewelry, wool, spices, and metal. anything that could turn a profit. By the time he returned to Florence, he was a millionaire by medieval standards, and went on to open banks in Barcelona, Valencia, Mallorca, Pisa, and Genoa. He was living proof that even in a world chained by class, ambition could buy freedom. Balance scale the danger of too much gold. But beware, in the Middle Ages, money could be as deadly as it was powerful. The Knights Templar learned that lesson the hard way. Originally formed to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, they soon became Europe's most trusted bankers. Kings deposited their fortunes with them. Nobles borrowed from them to fund wars and crusades. By the 1240s, the Templars were operating like a modern international bank, handling foreign exchange, loans, and money transfers across continents. But when the debts of kings grew too large, danger followed. In the early 1300s, King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt to the Templars, saw a way out: destroy his creditors. With the Pope's blessing, he accused the Templars of heresy, had them arrested, tortured, and burned alive, and seized their entire fortune for the crown. It was the medieval equivalent of a financial coup. Pick gold of the gods, the richest man who ever lived. And if all else failed, there was one final shortcut to wealth, the oldest one in human history: find gold. Mansa Musa, ruler of the Mali Empire in the 14th century, did exactly that. His empire controlled the salt trade in the north and the gold mines in the south, making him so rich that his wealth is still considered unquantifiable. When he traveled to Mecca in 1324, he passed through Cairo with an entourage of 60,000 men and so much gold that his generosity caused a temporary economic collapse in Egypt. Yes, he gave away so much money that the entire economy inflated for years. Historians still call him the richest man who ever lived. Castle final reflection: the true wealth of the Middle Ages. So, what does all this tell us? That even in the darkest, most rigid times, opportunity found a way. Some fought for wealth, some prayed for it, and others simply built it. Coin by coin, trade by trade, century after century. The Middle Ages weren't just about knights and castles. They were about ambition, greed, faith, and innovation, the very ingredients that shaped the modern world. Brain questions to leave the viewer thinking. Would you have survived the Middle Ages? Would you have fought, prayed, or traded your way to the top? Or would you have stayed in the mud, watching others rise while dreaming of gold you'd never touch? Clapperboard, thanks for watching this journey through time. If you enjoyed it, subscribe for more hidden stories of the Middle Ages, where power, faith, and fortune were forged not by chance, but by will.